Hey everyone, it is August 31st. This is Octagon Outlook, and I'm your host, James Lynch. Thanks so much for tuning in. On today's show, we're going to be recapping UFC Vegas 7. UFC Vegas 8. Going to be looking ahead to UFC Vegas 9. There's too many Vegases in here. It's a little bit confusing. And answer your questions at the end of this show. We got a lot to talk about. We're going to dive right into it. But first, I got to point out to you guys, if you haven't hit that notification bell, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you subscribe to the Line Movement channel. I do this show every week at 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time, and I also have all my good interviews, my best interviews that you'll see on this channel as well. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, and let's dig into this card, UFC Vegas 7. We talked about it last week. Anthony Smith, Alexander Rakic. It is Alexander Rakic going out and getting a unanimous decision victory over Anthony Smith. I'll be honest, pre-fight, I talked about this. I thought this would be a little bit closer of a matchup, but Anthony Smith having no answers for Rakic, who put on a great performance. I honestly thought the fight was going to be stopped in the first round when Smith went down. You saw Rakic with the leg kicks, and Smith, falling like a tree in the forest, just went down, and he was on his side, kind of in the fetal position a little bit, and wasn't really doing a whole lot. And I don't know, they alluded to it on the broadcast about how Smith might have hurt his leg in that initial kick that he had, and it was one of those things where he was able to survive, and Rakic couldn't take advantage of that. And then in the second round, it was more of the same, where Rakic was able to get Smith to the ground. And with this being a 3-round fight, I think if this was 2 extra rounds, Rakic probably could have finished, but he wasn't able to. So credit for Anthony Smith for hanging on there, but he didn't really do a whole lot in this fight. He landed maybe a few good shots in the 3 rounds, but this was all Alexander Rakic. Really great performance, bouncing back from that controversial loss to Volkan Ozdemir. And for Anthony Smith, it is back-to-back losses for the first time since 2013. So we're not used to seeing Lionheart losing 2 straight here. So what's next for both fighters? We'll get into that in a little bit later as far as what's next for Anthony Smith. But for Alexander Rakic, I think there's one fight that makes a lot of sense. If you look at the rankings and you look at who is booked up right now, it is Yuri Prochaska. Of course, Prochaska coming off a huge win himself over Volkan Ozdemir, knocking him out in the second round in his UFC debut. I think that makes a ton of sense. Just imagine the violence that fight is going to take place. But Rakic, I thought really dominant performance, looked great. People talking about him getting a title shot off of this, I don't really agree with that. Had he finished Smith, which I thought he was going to, then we can have that conversation. But I thought overall, Rakic put on a pretty solid performance, but still not there yet as far as being a contender, in my opinion. He needs another win and possibly a finish in his next fight to sort of prove that. But like I said, the Yuri Rakic fight makes a ton of sense. And for Anthony Smith, I will mention now, as far as what's next for him, I think he's got to get like a Misha Serkinov, like a fight that's, against someone that he should have a clear advantage over. He was the underdog heading into this fight, but give him, sort of a bounce back fight here and see where he goes from here. I'd have no issues with Anthony Smith taking the rest of the year off and getting back at it early next year, just with what happened in this fight. But we'll see what he decides to do going forward. But I do have some suggestions for Anthony Smith going forward, which I will do after this recap. How about the co-main event? Neil Magny getting a decision win over Robbie Lawler. If you guys watched the show last week, I pretty much called this to a T. I didn't think Robbie Lawler would go out there and knock out Neil Magny, nor did I think he would be able to go out there and outstrike Neil Magny. Now, there were some moments in this fight where, Magny wasn't able to get the takedown on Robbie Lawler and the fight stood standing, especially in that second round where Lawler was able to get some shots off. But Magny showing a lot of maturity in his fight career. The old Neil Magny might have got finished in that second round if it was, standing and trading, but he was able to overcome that, really keep Lawler at range and using his height and reach advantage very well in this fight. I thought that was very good on Neil. I thought this was one of the smartest fights he's had in his career. He tried to submit Robbie Lawler in the first round, nearly had a couple holds in there. And then the second round, not getting into a brawl with Robbie Lawler. That's a mistake. Even at 38 years old, Robbie Lawler still is dangerous. So for Neil Magny to do that, and then obviously the third round, really just taking over and basically making it so Robbie Lawler didn't have any answers. Robbie Lawler shot for a takedown in this fight, which is like insane if you think of, what he possesses in terms of his striking abilities. I thought that was a little bit crazy, but clearly the Robbie Lawler we've seen in the past is no longer the same Robbie Lawler we're seeing here and there. And on the same token, give credit to Neil Magny. Here's a guy that, 3 fights ago got knocked out by Santiago Ponzinibbio. He's now won 3 straight fights. He's got to get a notable opponent next, whether it's, Michael Chiesa or maybe they rebook that Jeff Neal fight. But I thought Neil Magny put on a spectacular performance on Saturday in the co-main event. And this was the biggest win of his career, taking out a former welterweight champion in Robbie Lawler. So what's next for Lawler? Well, I think it's pretty much fun fights from here on out, unless they want to give him the prospect route. You build him up, build up another prospect, getting him to fight Lawler at this point. But I think, fights against Carlos Condit. I know Condit is, booked up right now, but maybe the winner of that fight with him and Court McGee, or you could do, Mike Perry or even Anthony Pettis. Someone suggested that as well. I think that's a fun, notable matchup where it's just two guys trading that aren't really close to title contention, but you could still make that fight just out of an intrigue factor. So either way, I think Robbie gets maybe a fight or two left, and then it's either retirement or maybe off to bare knuckle fighting or maybe off to Bellator. I don't know. But at 38 years old, Robbie Lawler has nothing to prove in the UFC, a former this is his second tour with the UFC. If you remember how young he was when he started, remember those fights with Nick Diaz and Tiki Gozan and everyone else. So it's really crazy to see the career that Robbie Lawler has had, especially going over to Strikeforce and coming back. So all the power to Robbie Lawler. We'll hopefully get a fun fight next. And for Magny, like I said, big statement here on Saturday. He's ready for those top fighters yet again in his career. Let's move along to the flyweight division. We've got Alexa Grasso and Ji Young Kim, and it's Grasso getting the decision in this fight. I thought she put on a pretty solid performance. I mean, Kim had a height and reach advantage in this fight. It didn't seem to matter. Grasso really going out there and showing her skills, and I thought looked a lot better at 125 than we've seen in her previous fights. Of course, she missed weight at strawweight. That's why she had to move up to 125 in this fight. And not much to say about this matchup. I think this is sort of how we talked about this fight on the preview show and on the Line Movement betting show last week with Dan Tom, where, I thought Grasso was a better fighter. It's just a matter of could she hang with fighters that are a little bit bigger than her? Clearly, she answered that question, but I do wonder how she would do against some of the better fighters in this division, like a Lauren Murphy or Cynthia Calvillo. We'll have to see how she does in her next fight, but big win for her, getting back in the win column. She's now 12-3 overall. And for Kim, back to the drawing board, but nonetheless, still put on a pretty decent effort on Saturday night. All right, let's move along to the featherweight division. Ricardo Llamas getting a decision victory over Bill Algeo. I called this wrong. I mean, Algeo did have his moments in this fight. There was a few times where I thought he was going to have Llamas hurt, but credit to Llamas, that veteran experience really paid off. He was able to persevere, especially in that third round where he really put a beat down on Bill Algeo in this fight. This was a good fight by both guys. It's one of those fights where I don't really think Algeo, even though he lost, I think his stock went up to a certain degree. He hung in there with a veteran on short notice, put on a pretty solid performance. And for Ricardo Llamas, hinting at retirement, I wouldn't be upset if he decided to hang up the gloves. It's very rare to see a fighter go off on a win in their MMA career. So this is a good win for Llamas, getting back in the win column, of course, coming off that loss to Calvin Kattar before that, having a long layoff. I thought he put on a pretty solid performance tonight, but I mean, not the type of performance you think he could go back into title contention or become a contender anymore. No offense, but I thought it was a good win for him. And if he decides to hang it up, all the power to him. Really good move. For Bill Algeo, you know what? Not bad losing to a guy in Llamas who just had way more fights than he did. I'm sure he's going to get a pretty exciting fight next. And at featherweight, which is a pretty deep division, he's going to need to fight someone good next just to keep himself in the rankings, or put himself in the rankings, I should say. So be keeping an eye out there for Bill Algeo and what is next in his fight. Let's go through the prelims here quickly. Not a ton to talk about. I actually thought the prelims were almost better than the main card. We had Impa Kasanage getting the decision win over Maki Pitolo. Good on him. I mean, he just won a couple weeks ago in Contender Series, used that momentum, went into this fight, and Pitolo really having no answers. Like I said on the pre-show, I thought, if Pitolo was going to win this fight, it was going to be by knockout. Kasanage really showing that he's ready for the UFC and put on a pretty solid performance over a vet in Maki Pitolo. So good win there for Impa. How about Zach Cummins? What a fight this was. If you remember on the betting show I spoke about, I think it was the betting show, it might have been my podcast, but I picked Cummins as the underdog, and I felt like he was being overlooked here, and Cummins basically pulled this one out at the last minute. I mean, it was a close fight going on the scorecards. I'm curious to see how the judges would have scored that one. I thought both guys put on, a pretty close fight overall, but it was at the end where Cummins landed that head kick and knocked down DiCirico in that fight, and DiCirico not able to stand up. He kind of did the wobbly legs heading to his corner. So I'm sure that swayed the judges a little bit. That really should have been called a TKO victory for Zach Cummins. He was clearly out. I mean, he wasn't getting up. He had trouble walking. It kind of reminds me a bit of the Dominic Reyes and Ovin SaintPreux fight we had a couple of years ago where same thing. Reyes had finished SaintPreux at the last minute. They still ruled it a decision. Same thing here for Zach Cummins, but good win for Zach Cummins. 36 years old. I believe this is his third straight win. He's now won, I think, 3 in a row now since moving back up to 185. So I think that's the right weight class for him. And, fought on the card as his teammate Anthony Smith. And I don't know if that helped him or not, but I thought he looked really good here. Look, Zach Cummins is not going to be fighting for a title or fighting a contender anytime soon, but the fact that he's still getting wins like this at 36, really solid move for him. I've been having some people asking me what's next for DiCirico. I think he might get cut after this. He's really looked underwhelming after, going undefeated, in his UFC career. And now he's lost, I think, 3 in a row now. So back to the drawing board for him. How about Alex Caceres? Poor guy had, 3 opponent switch-ups. He had the Jigakaze fight, which ended up not happening. Then he had Kevin Kroom. Kevin Kroom, I think it was a COVID issue or something, pulled him out of the fight. And then we get Austin Springer, who, by the way, had a cool Seahawks tattoo. Go Seahawks. I'm a Seahawks fan there. But Springer not having any answers for Alex Caceres' ground game. Caceres getting the first-round submission. Good for Alex Caceres. We forget that this guy is only 33 years old, not exactly a guy who's past his prime or anything like that. Sorry, he's 32. I'm giving him too much. I'm not giving him enough credit here. That's 3 wins in a row now since losing to Kron Gracie. That's 4 of his last 5. This guy needs to step up. The people who said he was done and off to Bellator just because he's got 12 losses, it doesn't matter. This guy's still very dangerous. I'd like to see him get a nice opponent here up next. How about Sean Brady? Something I talked about on the pre-show was that I thought he was going to get a finish. He did get the finish. Wasn't expecting a submission. Thought maybe it would have been a knockout, but nonetheless, Brady gets his first finish in the UFC. He's now 13-0, getting the stoppage win over Christian Aguilera. Just solid performance all around. Brady, a big favorite heading into this fight. He certainly looked like it here. Just totally outmatched his opponent. With this win, especially since he got a finish, I'd like to see Brady get a top 15 opponent now. I think he's earned it. 3 straight wins, especially coming off a finish in his last fight. Really impressed by that. And for Aguilera, it's we'll see where he goes from here, but that was a pretty one-sided fight with Brady getting the win here. And then the 2 other fights I'll quickly go over. One of them I really got to point out, but Polyana Viana getting the submission win over Emily Whitmire. It's really unfortunate that Whitmire, once again, losing by submission, just hasn't been able to put it together. This might be the end of her in the UFC. She's had a lot of opportunities, and losing by first-round submission, not a great look. And Polyana Viana, good for her. I think she had a 3-fight losing streak heading into this one, and for her to go out there and get a submission win like this over Whitmire, really solid performance. So she's got a lot of life left in the strawweight division. But how about the opening fight? We got to talk about this. I know my producer Jordan's probably smiling ear to ear on that performance because Elevation Fight Team member Mallory Martin, what a comeback fight this was. Hannah Cyphers had Mallory Martin in a ton of trouble in this fight. Some refs might have even stopped it in that first round. Cyphers out of nowhere. By the way, Cyphers missed weight. I don't know what that was about. She's like an atom weight, and somehow she came in overweight for this fight. Don't get that. Even talking to Hannah, it seemed like the weight cut was fine, so I don't know what happened there. But either way, she went out there, looked like she was going to get the finish. We talked about the strength and the power of Hannah Cyphers. It certainly looked that way in that first round, but credit to Mallory Martin. She persevered, and in that second round, she gets a submission. We know the weakness on the ground of Hannah Cyphers as far as that goes, and Cypher and Martin went out there and got a submission win, getting her first UFC victory. Very emotional after the fight. I don't think she went into too much detail, but if you saw my interview with her, she spoke about how, she had a sickness in her debut, and then she had the knee problems in most of her career before that. So for her to go out there and get this win, I know a lot of things went into this fight. So good on her for getting the win. And for Hannah Cyphers, that's 4 losses in a row. She's undoubtedly going to get cut. I'd like to see her go to Invicta and fight in the Atomate division. I think she could be a real problem for a lot of the women, considering how well she's done at strawweight. And I know she's lost, but she's still fighting really good fighters and still having her moments in those fights. So I'd like to see how she does in Invicta at atomweight. And I'd also like to see her switch camps. I don't know what she's doing back home, but I think she needs to switch some things up. Maybe go to like an American Top Team. Just try something different, because obviously there's a glaring weakness on the ground there for Hannah Cyphers. So yeah, really good card overall, especially those first couple fights on the prelims, and thoroughly enjoyed that. All right, so I mentioned it there. I got a rant here on Anthony Smith. I'm a big Anthony Smith fan. I think he's a great analyst. I think he's a guy that has a future outside of the sport whenever he does decide to hang up the gloves, so to speak. But that type of performance he put on Saturday, where it was just a one-sided beatdown from Alexander Rakic, I think showed to me that Anthony Smith needs to make some changes in his career. And I love Factory X and I love Mark Montoya, but I think to some degree Anthony Smith is a little bit too loyal to that gym. Now, look, he doesn't have to leave Factory X. What I would suggest, if I'm Anthony Smith, and I realize I'm a guy here behind a webcam, but I would like to see him try his hand at some cross-training, go out to some other gyms, broaden his horizons a little bit, because when you lose a fight the way he did, and then even the fight before that, where he was pretty much dominated after the first round, you got to make some changes. And I think, Smith isn't a young guy. He's got to go out there and make some changes now if he ever wants to get back to being a contender here. So I'd like to see him try and even go next door to Elevation Fight Team, see what he could do with those guys over there. Maybe go and train at the PI, train at Extreme Couture. I'd like to see him get some different looks, though, because I think what he's doing right now at Factory X is not working. We saw Ian Heinisch leave that gym earlier this year, and he went out and has been doing some different training as well. I know he was at Genesis and he was at a few other spots as well, and he won his last fight by first round round stoppage. So the same thing here could happen for Anthony Smith. We know the loyalty he has to Mark Montoya to the point of where, Mark didn't tell him to throw in the towel in the Glover fight, and he listened to him, and he probably took some unnecessary punishment that he didn't need to take in that fight. So I would like to see Smith, just take a clear look. He talked about it post-fight. He needs to make some changes. Well, I'm telling you now, the change he needs to make is switching gyms, and at least, not even necessarily leaving Factory X completely, but going to another gym and getting some different looks, because I think he's run his course at Factory X, and he needs to get some different looks now and see what he's capable of in different gyms. And I would like to see a coaching change there for him just to see how he does. And I have nothing but respect for Mark Montoya. He's created some of the best fighters you'll see in the Octagon, but I think this is a case of Smith being a little bit too loyal to that gym. He's got to make some serious changes because, like I said, he hasn't lost 2 straight since 2013. All right. Let's get to UFC Vegas 9. Not a great card, if I'm going to be completely honest, but we will go through some of the fights here and obviously everything on the main card like we usually do. Let's start first in the featherweight division. It's actually a pair of bantamweights that are fighting at featherweight, but we've got Brian Kelleher taking on Kevin Natividad. I think that's how you say it, but Natividad coming to us from LFA. Then this is a short notice fight because if you remember, Ricky Simone was supposed to be fighting Brian Kelleher. Simone is out. One of his cornermen tested positive for COVID-19. And for Kelleher, he's got to get back on the winning track on this one just because of the fact that, he got knocked out didn't get knocked out. He lost a decision to Cody Stamann in his last fight. So he's looking to get back on the winning track here. Actually, Kelleher, is a guy that typically does not lose back-to-back fights. So it'll be kind of interesting here. Now, Natividad, let's start with him. He's got a 5-fight win streak heading into this one, most of those being finishes. He's got 3 finishes during that winning streak. He's coming off a win over Kyle Estrada at LFA 85 back in July. So he's fought fairly frequently as far as that goes in terms of his last couple of performances. And the height and reach, I looked it up. These guys are pretty similar. Kelleher's a little bit older. Natividad is only 27 years old. Kelleher is 34. Kelleher's 5'6" with the 64-inch reach. Natividad is 70.5-inch reach and is 5'6", so 6-inch reach advantage there for Natividad. We'll see if that ends up paying off. Fought some pretty decent competition overall in terms of coming into the UFC. But usually in a case like this, especially on short notice, I tend to go with the veteran in a situation like this. Kelleher's fought in the UFC a lot longer. He has some good wins. Let's not forget another guy on this card who we'll talk about here shortly, Hunter Azure. Kelleher's the only guy to finish him in his career. So Boom's a guy that's very active, always brings it in every fight, and he's a pretty tough guy to finish in general. I mean, other than the loss he had to Montel Jackson and Lineker, in general, he's a guy that usually goes the distance and gives you sort of a dogfight. So I am going to pick Brian Kelleher in this fight. I'll take him by decision. I think the main thing here is for him to just get the win and get back on the winning track here. And I think he can take advantage of a guy who doesn't have as much experience here. I mean, Kelleher's got 32 fights overall, whereas he's fighting a guy who's only got 10 fights. It's a huge experience gap. I know Kelleher lost his last fight, but there were some circumstances too, like with fighting Cody Stamann, who lost his brother. I mean, everyone was rooting for Stamann in that fight. They couldn't believe that he was able to overcome this adversity and still fight with the loss of his brother, which was unexpected. So, that's got to suck as a fighter when you're going in there and you got everyone rooting against you because they want to see your opponent win. So he talked about that too when I spoke to Brian after that fight. He said it did play a role in the fight. So I think with a clear head, and even though he's got a new opponent, I think Brian Kelleher gets the decision in this fight. Let's keep things moving here. We're going to go to that fight I referenced, Cole Smith, Hunter Azure. Cole Smith right now is the underdog. Hunter Azure is the favorite. Now, Hunter Azure fought Brian Kelleher earlier this year, ended up getting finished in that last fight. Cole Smith has not fought since UFC Vancouver, where he lost a split decision to Miles John. So Cole Smith in the longest layoff of his career. We'll see how he looks. He had some injuries. That's part of the reason why he wasn't booked right away. He says, when I spoke to him a couple weeks ago, he says that he's all healed up. He's ready to go. Cole's a great fighter. He's a big bantamweight. It's a process for him to get down to the weight. So this wasn't a short notice fight. So I don't anticipate Cole having any weight cut issues. Hunter's actually a pretty tall bantamweight himself. If you look at the height and reach in this fight, I think Hunter Azure is 5'10". Whereas is 5'8". Cole Smith is 5'11". But in terms of the reach, Hunter Azure actually has the 3-inch advantage in this fight, 3.5-inch advantage. So that's a little bit interesting in this one. They both come from good camps. Cole Smith trains everywhere here in BC, close to where I am. He trains at the Sound in Squamish. He trains at Checkmat Vancouver with Tristan Connolly. He trains at Revolution Martial Arts, which is where Jeremy Kennedy and Bibiana Fernandez train as well. So he's getting a lot of good looks. Hunter Azure used to be at the Lab. Now he trains at Fight Ready, and they have a whole stable of great fighters over there, including Henry Cejudo, Drakkar Klose, Dan Moret. There's just a lot of good looks for him over there. So my read on this is that I think it's going to be a close fight. I'm going to pick Hunter Azure just because of the activity a little bit more frequent there. And, again, has I think a few more fights than Cole Smith overall. But I think if you're looking to bet this fight, I do think there is some value on Cole Smith as the underdog, just because we don't know how he's going to look. I mean, even his debut that he had, which was against Mitch Gagnon, that was a fight he almost lost, and he was able to come back and get it done. So I think Azure is the better fighter, but with Smith's, strength and just his overall size, I think it could be an issue here for Azure. So the pick is Azure, but the bet, if I was going to do this one, would be Cole Smith. That's something to keep an eye on in this fight. We're going to jump ahead to the women's flyweight division now. Montana De La Rosa, Viviana Rujo. Rujo is the favorite, and I don't really get it. I don't honestly. Rujo's older. We forget how young Montana De La Rosa is in this fight. She's only 25 years old. And the big move I like is that she's now at Elevation Fight Team. She actually made the move out there with her husband, Mark De La Rosa. So they are both training there right now. I think that's an excellent move. When I spoke to Montana, she just talked about how she just wasn't getting the look she wanted back home in Texas. She does a bit of cross training down there, but here it's just all fighting and all camp. And there's a lot of good women training there as well. We saw Shauna Dobson a few weeks ago get a big win. We saw Mallory Martin last week get a big win. So I think, being able to train with women consistently and just having the type of coaching like Trevor Whitman and just so many good options there at that gym for Montana De La Rosa. I think that's a really big move for here. She's also coming off a win in her last fight over Maria Romero Barella. The only loss in the UFC she has is to Andrea Lee, which is, Lee's a top contender in that division. So that's not a bad loss to have. I think in general, De La Rosa's look great. Rujo, 33 years old. She is 5'4" with a 68-inch reach, whereas De La Rosa is 5'7" with a 68-inch reach. So De La Rosa a little bit taller, but younger. And Rujo hasn't fought since that loss to Jessica Ai in December at UFC 245. So she's coming into this with a bit of a layoff. She does have that win over Alexis Davis, which I think was the reason, and I think is the reason why she's the favorite in this fight. But I'm going with the upset here. I think De La Rosa, we're going to see the best version of her in this fight. I think the switching camps is going to really pay dividends for her. And I think she'll edge out a decision in this fight. And I do see value on her as the underdog right now. So maybe take a look at that one, because I see it as a fairly even fight. The one interesting thing is that De La Rosa does win a lot of her fights by submission. You saw the submission wins over Ostovich and Chasm and Christina Marks. Arujo never been submitted in her career. It might be worth it to take a stab at the submission prop just in case, just to see if there's some cool value on that one. You never know with underdogs, but either way, I like Montana De La Rosa in this fight to get the upset. And then the last fight we're going to talk about here that is the last fight we're talking about in the prelims. We're going to go right to the main card right now because there's a lot of interesting fights here. By the way, this is only a 10-fight card. There's a bunch of fights that had fallen out, including the Nico Montano and Julia Avila fight, which was taken off this card. And we also had to switch up on the main card, which I will get to in a second. But let's start first with Thiago Moises and Jalen Turner. Jalen Turner is the underdog in this fight, which I find kind of interesting because he's huge. I mean, I met Jalen Turner. I spoke about this before. He looks like a middleweight. He is 6 feet 2 inches tall. 6 foot 3 inches tall, 75.5 inch reach advantage. Like that's the stats of like a middleweight. That's huge. I don't know how he makes 155. And actually, one of the things he told me when I spoke to him before this fight is that he got as heavy as 193. So keep an eye out for the weight cut. He says it's under control, but still, that's a lot to come down from fighting at 155, coming down from 193. That's a little crazy. Thiago Moises, we know the story with him. Had a bit of an up and down UFC career, had a really tough debut against Beneil Dariush, had the win over Kurt Holloway, but had a huge win in his last fight against Michael Johnson in a fight that he was losing, but ended up coming back in the second and submitting Michael Johnson. So that's a huge win for him. That's probably why Moises is the favorite in this fight. I actually do think he might be the better fighter here between the two of them. Comes from a great camp as well, getting to work at American Top Team, and told me when I spoke to him that he's been working with middleweights because that's how big Jalen Turner is. So I think Moises will be very prepared in this fight. But Jalen Turner with that size, it gives me a little bit of worry here. So the pick's going to be Thiago Moises. Like I said, on paper, the better fighter. But Jalen Turner is one of those guys that if he's able to utilize his height and reach, he could potentially knock out Thiago Moises or potentially submit him as well, just because we'll see how he deals with that height and reach in this fight. So that's the one thing I'll say here. The pick is going to be Moises. But if you're looking to bet this one, definitely look at some underdog, either props or just straight up with Jalen Turner, because he's an interesting guy. And let's not forget either, 25 years old. They're both 25. So Jalen Turner, not as much experience as Thiago Moises, but still a guy that can really put it together as far as that goes. So keep an eye out for that fight opening up the main card. Sticking with the main card, we're going to go to the welterweight division now. Michelle Pereira, Zelem Amadiev. Pereira's the favorite slightly. This is a fight that I would personally stay away from. Both guys have been super inconsistent in their career. Pereira basically had a gifted fight against Tristan Connolly last September, if you remember. Way bigger guy. I mean, Connolly's a lightweight, and he had to go fight a guy in Pereira who really could fight at middleweight. Ended up losing that fight. He missed weight, ended up losing just because of bad fight IQ. He was goofing around doing all of his, spinny moves and all that stuff. And it didn't end up working out because Connolly was able to take him down and grind him out and ended up winning a decision there. And then in his last fight, he was clearly on his way to beating Diego Sanchez, but then threw an illegal knee, and Sanchez says, I can't fight anymore. So they awarded him the fight. So that realistically could have been a win there for Michel Pereira. But again, just some really bad fight IQ in that one. And then, of course, his debut, he had that really impressive flying knee and punch win over Danny Roberts. So I think Pereira is the better fighter, but I can't really trust him here just because he's a guy that, like I said, just for whatever reason, doesn't have good fight IQ. And Amadiev, he's another guy that's super inconsistent. So he lost his UFC debut to Max Griffin. And I don't know if you guys know this, but he actually was trying to fight Max Griffin before the fight. There was a lot of bad blood there. They had trained a little bit of Extreme Couture when Max was cross-training there and Amadiev was still working there. And he said that he was basically going in there and trying to hurt his training partners, I should say. So it's kind of he's a bit of a hothead, I think is the way to sort of describe him. So, and it's shown in his fights. I think he fought too emotional against Max Griffin, ended up losing that fight. And then he lost his last fight to Danny Roberts as well. So again, it's a case of, I think Pereira is the better fighter, but just with both guys being a little bit unstable in terms of not really putting it together, I'll pick Pereira, but no bet for me on this fight because I just think there's too many question marks with both guys heading into the fight. And even if you look at their height and reach, they're pretty similar. Pereira's 6'1" with the 73-inch reach. Amadiev is 6 feet with the 76-inch reach. So it's actually Amadiev with the reach advantage in this fight. But like I said, I'm waiting for these guys to have sort of a good performance here in this fight, and then we can maybe put to rest some question marks, but too many question marks going into this one. And let's keep moving on. In the women's bantamweight division, it was supposed to be Sajara Eubanks against Macy Chasson. Insert Carol Rosa, who now comes in and who's now actually the favorite in this fight, which I found kind of interesting here. Sajara Eubanks coming off a really dominant win over Sarah Morris in her last fight. Carol Rosa hasn't fought since that win over, fought in July, I should say. It wasn't that long ago. Defeated Vanessa Mello by decision at UFC 251. But before that, she hadn't fought since August of last year when she got that win over Laura Procapo in that fight. So height and reach wise, Rosa is 5'5" with the 67.5-inch reach, whereas Sajara Eubanks is 5'4" with the 67-inch reach. So pretty similar physically. Sajara Eubanks a lot older at 35, 10 years older than her opponent here. So that's likely why Rosa is the favorite here. Kind of like the Jalen Turner and Moises fight. I do think there could be some value here on the underdog with Sajara Eubanks. I like the fact that she's been really putting in the work with Mark Henry, and I think you're seeing some improvements in fights. I mean, the Betchkahea fight was a fight I thought she should have won. I don't know what happened in that one, but that Aspen Ladd fight before that, even though she lost, she had her moments in that fight. And Aspen's one of the top, bantamweights, flyweights, I should say, in that division. That actually forced Sajara up a weight class after that fight. So, she's just been trying to put it together. Actually, no, that was a bantamweight fight. What happened in that? Why was that bantamweight? Never mind. Anyways, doesn't matter. But it was a bantamweight fight as well. So Sajara obviously carving out her path, so to speak, at 135 pounds. I think this is going to go the distance. Sajara is pretty tough to finish. Same with Carol Rosa. I'll go Rosa by decision, but if you're looking to bet this, I think there could be some value on Sajara Eubanks, even though she is older. I just like the strength that she showed in her last fight. I think she can outmuscle some of her opponents, and we'll see how much stronger she is in this fight. Let's get to the co-main event here. Not going to say much on this one because we previewed this fight 2 weeks ago. We got Ovin SaintPreux and Alonzo Menefield. I think this is booked a little bit too soon. We had that issue last week with Ankalaev and Kutalaba, where once again, Kutalaba tested positive for COVID-19. Why? I think because they booked it too soon. Kutalaba tested positive before, and they decided to rebook the fight too close. I think they're doing the same thing here because it was OSP who tested positive for COVID. Who's to say he's not going to get it again? I hope it happens. I'm not trying to jinx anyone here, but that is something to take note of. Menefield is a slight favorite in this fight. I can understand that. Younger guy, a little bit faster. Not as much experience, though, so that is one thing to be cautious of. OSP, way more fights, 37 years old, but just so inconsistent. I just, kind of like I said last time, I just can't trust OSP anymore because there's some fights he goes out there and looks great, and then there's other fights he looks terrible. And this could be a fight where he could look terrible, even though he's got way more experience than Menefield. Menefield, I think with his striking, I think he's going to go out there and catch OSP at some point. I'm predicting a second-round knockout on this one. I know OSP is pretty tough to knock out. I think the last guy to do it was Jimmy Manua back in 2016. So that is one thing to sort of keep in mind, is that can OSP hold up the 3 rounds? He might be able to, but I just think Menefield's speed is going to be too much for OSP in this fight. And I think he gets the win here. And OSP potentially could pull up the upset with the experience, but I can't at this point trust him as a fighter to get it done. He's just too inconsistent in my opinion. So I'm going Menefield by second round knockout. And let's get to the main event here. Alistair Overeem, Augusto Sakai. Overeem only a slight favorite, and I do see value on him here at the line that it's currently at, because I think he should be like a 2 to 3 to 1 favorite here. Now, look, Overeem taken a lot of damage in his career. He's got 18 losses in his career. A lot of those are by knockout, which is, scary a little bit, right? Like, he's been knocked out a ton of times. He's 40 years old, but he's fighting a guy in Augusto Sakai who's just been so, like, even though he's undefeated, not really that impressive. The only impressive win he's had in the Octagon was last September at UFC Vancouver, where he knocked out Marcin Tybura in 59 seconds. But other than that, it's a lot of split decisions. It's a lot of fights where he just hasn't impressed me that much, to be honest. And I think fighting a guy in Overeem, which, by the way, good matchmaking here. Good to see where Overeem fits. Good to see where Sakai fits. But Overeem, since he's gone to Elevation Fight Team, has looked amazing. Yes, he lost to Rosenstruik, but that was a fight that he was winning, and he just ended up getting knocked out at the last minute. So, I mean, if they rematch, that fight could have gone either way. But his last fight really showed me that this guy is still a threat at heavyweight. Walt Harris had him out in that first round, and it looked like it was just going to be a TKO win for Walt Harris. And Overeem not only overcame that, but he ended up finishing Walt Harris in the second round. And think about that fight, too, where the personal tragedy of Walt Harris, everyone's cheering for him. Everyone wants to see the Reem lose. And Reem, that veteran experience, he went out there and got it done against Walt Harris. So I was really impressed by that. Let's also not forget the fight before that. He had a TKO win over Alexei Oleinik as well in the first round, which was very impressive too. So just way more experience than his opponent. I mean, Overeem made his MMA debut in 1999. Augusto Sakai made his MMA debut in 2011. Huge difference in experience there, not to mention the kickboxing experience as well. The only way Overeem loses this fight is if he gets too reckless with his striking, leaves an opening there, and Sakai could potentially knock him out. But Sakai's not much of a knockout artist. He's a guy that goes to the decision. I thought he lost that fight against Andrei Arlovsky. A lot of other media members did as well. I don't think a single media member, if you go to MMA Decisions, scored that fight for Sakai in that matchup. So I'm going Overeem by third round knockout, something like that. I think he gets it done. I think he finds his timing, and I just think he's the better fighter. And like I said, I think the only way Overeem loses this fight is if he makes a mistake and gets caught. But I think he's learned from that against Rosenstruik and getting to train with guys like Curtis Blades and some of the other studs at Elevation Fight Team. He's going to be on point in this fight. So give me Alistair Overeem by knockout. I feel pretty strongly he gets it done over a guy in Sakai who's just not at his level yet. So give me Overeem by knockout. All right. One of the things I didn't get to talk about last week on the show, and I wanted to sort of end things here before we take some listener questions after this, is Contender Series. We had Contender Series last week, and they've been pretty good about the contracts over the last couple of weeks in terms of who they've been handing them out to. But last week, I think Dana White made a big mistake, and I'll go into detail about that now. Now, look. They hand out a lot of contracts. I think the week before last, they handed out 5 contracts. Pretty tough to sign everyone every single week, but I didn't like the reasoning for not signing Anthony Romero. And before you guys say I'm biased because Anthony Romero's Canadian and that I followed his career, it's not even a case of that. It's just the excuses they gave because I just don't buy it. So if you guys didn't see it last week, Anthony Romero getting a pretty dominant win, in my opinion, over Mike Breeden in his last fight. Wasn't able to finish the fight, even though Breeden was clearly hurt in that one. And, just wasn't able to capitalize. But I think it was really a case of him fighting someone that's just rock solid in terms of his, his fight skill and everything, right? So, Dana White said he didn't sign Romero for 2 reasons. Number one, he says he's 23 and he needs more experience. Well, I don't buy that. He's got 8 fights. How much more do you need in terms of experience in the cage? 8 fights is a lot. There's guys in the UFC right now and girls that don't have as many fights as that. So I don't buy that. The number 2 thing is this whole thing about, well, you got to finish a fight like that. Maybe he just fought a guy that's really good. It reminds me of the whole Curtis Blades and Alexander Volkov fight where Dana White basically made the narrative towards the media and the fans where Curtis Blades is a boring fighter. Really? Because I remember Curtis Blades finishing a bunch of his opponents, including Junior Dos Santos and Overeem and a lot of these other guys, but he fought a guy who's tough to finish in Volkov. If you look at Volkov's only stoppage loss in the Octagon, it's against Derek Lewis, and that was literally at the last minute. Like, that's the equivalent of like a Hail Mary pass in football at the last minute, what Derek Lewis did to Alexander Volkov. So for people to criticize Blades about that performance not finishing Volkov, they got to look at who he's fighting. And the same thing here applies here to Anthony Romero. Romero fought a guy who's very durable, in my opinion, a guy that is very tough to finish in terms of Mike Breeden and what he brings to the table. And if you look at Mike Breeden's career, I mean, if you look at his losses, he's only got 1 knockout loss in his career, and that was in 57 seconds. He's very difficult to finish. So I wish Dana would focus on that. If Dana wanted to say, hey, look, we gave out too many contracts last week, and we don't feel that Romero's UFC ready, fair enough. No debate there, but don't use the excuse of that he needs more fights or that he had to finish the fight, because I'll tell you what, there's been guys that won contracts on the Contender Series that went the distance, including Puna Soriano last year, who out-wrestled Jamie Pickett and ended up getting a contract. I didn't see him get it finished, so why did he get a contract and Romero didn't? It's because they're just making up excuses. So I hope Anthony Romero either gets a short notice call coming up here soon. I know he's going to stay ready. Or if you're Bellator, take advantage of that. Grab this guy. He's going to be an absolute talent. Because I thought Romero had one of the best performances last week on the show, especially at 23 years old. The ceiling's very high for the Niagara, Ontario native. The guy just looked really outstanding in that fight. And I think they're going to regret this signing. And they've done this before. Look, Brendan Loughnane last year when, they didn't sign him. And meanwhile, they signed Bill Algeo, who only ended up winning a fight after losing to Loughnane and then gets to fight last weekend in the UFC. What's up with that? So Loughnane, Austin Vanderford, Sydney Outlaw. There's a whole list of fighters that the UFC's missed on Contender Series. It happens every once in a while, but they really got to look a little bit more and maybe not hand out so many contracts, or maybe figure this thing out in terms of how many contracts you're going to hand out each week. I think they got to make that system a little bit better. So that's my rant on Contender Series. I think they got to do a better job of trying to, at least give reasons for why, certain fighters are not getting signed. Cause I just don't buy the experience thing with a guy like Anthony Romero as far as that goes. So anyways, we're going to end things here, answering a couple questions before we get out of here. Really appreciate you guys tuning in today, to the show. So I'm just pulling up this chat now. What do we got here? No shade, but Kim is not that good. I heard that she didn't have a training camp, though. Denise Knowles. Well, I thought Kim looked okay. I don't think there's any shade thrown. She clearly lost to Grasso. No debate there. What else do we have here? Some more questions. Can someone tell me why Kia Kara France is considered so good? I think he's overrated, but I'm open-minded. Could be the fact of where he trains. He's a city kickboxing guy, if I'm not mistaken. So I think he trains with those guys over there, or he's part of Volkanovski's camp. I can't remember which one, but I think that's probably why. And I think too, just, he had some good wins outside the UFC. So I think that's why he's getting a lot of hype. But, that fight with him and Brandon Royval is going to be very interesting because Royval turned a lot of heads getting that win over Tim Elliott in his debut. So I think that's a pretty pick'em fight as far as that goes. Let's see. Yeah, Max Holloway's agreeing with me here in the chat. What else do we got going on? Let's see. What else do we have here for questions? Elmar Umarov says James is on point. Well, thank you for that. I don't know what I'm on point about, but if you can let me know there, we'll take a few more questions as we're wrapping things up. If you guys missed, he's saying about Dana White. My producer is letting me know that. Yeah, about Dana White not signing Anthony Romero. Yeah, it's just baffling to me that they're missing out on it. Like, I could see if Romero was like a 30-year-old and he didn't finish. Like, even the Chris Curtis thing, I kind of get when they didn't sign him, because Romero is like in his 30s and like, you're not going to get a lot of upside on him. No shade to Chris Curtis, but he probably wasn't, even if he got signed to the UFC, he's probably not going to win a UFC title. Whereas Romero's 23, you got to look at the investment there. And that's where I think they missed the boat. And it's not a case of like a Chase Hooper where I think Romero needs more experience. He's got 8 fights and he's knocking guys out quickly. It just didn't on this particular night, but I think they're going to look back and maybe regret this one. So like I said, if Bellator's watching, maybe look at picking him up for their lightweight division, maybe look at, if you're one championship, I don't know, but I know Romero really wants to fight in the UFC. I think he's done more than enough to do that. So maybe it's just a case of, fighting in LFA or CFFC or one of those promotions on Fight Pass and continuing to rack up the wins. But Anthony Romero, to me, is a pick that they are going to regret going forward as far as that goes with how they're signing some of these fighters. So, and speaking of Contender Series, if you guys haven't seen it yet, I did a full preview of tomorrow night's card, which goes down to the Apex. You can find that on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/LynchOnSports, and went through the entire card. A little bit of a trickier card to predict on this one, just because I'm not familiar with as many fighters that are going to be, on that I'm used to speaking with or I know about. But Jimmy Flick, though, I'm really excited about him taking on Nate Smith, who's an Elevation Fight Team guy as well. So a lot of promising things there as far as that goes. Good time to wrap things up, everyone. Thanks so much for